Today we're going to talk about the effects of domestic violence on child witnesses. It is said that sometimes the grace of God appears wonderfully in young children. Sometimes the power of God brings to pass great things in His church by very weak and unlikely instruments. That the excellency of power might more evidently appear to be of God and not of man. This He does because of His enemies, that He may put them to silence. On slide 2, we're going to look at the definitions of domestic violence and subsequently child witness. To understand the effects of domestic violence on child witnesses, let us first gain clarity through some definitions. The United States Department of Justice's Office on Violence Against Women defines domestic violence as a pattern of abusive behavior in any relationship that is used by one partner to gain or maintain power and control over another intimate partner. Domestic violence can be physical, sexual, emotional, economic, or physiological actions or threats of actions that influence another person. This includes any behaviors that intimidate, manipulate, humiliate, isolate, frighten, terrorize, coerce, blame, hurt, injure, or wound someone. Therefore, domestic violence is recognized as patterned subjective behavior that is intended to control and harm one's partner, child, and/or parent. Furthermore, domestic violence tactics are used by one partner or family member to gain and/or maintain power and control over the other partner or over one's family members. Domestic violence is exhibited physically, sexually, emotionally, economically, spiritually, and/or psychologically through actions and/or threats of actions that intend or insinuate harm that is meant to influence submissive behavior from another person or persons. Domestically violent behaviors include intimidation, manipulation, humiliation, isolation, terrorism, coercion, and so on. In slide 3, a child witness is recognized and defined in an article by Jeffrey Edelson as a child who either saw and/or heard domestically violent interactions between members of their family. An example of how a child witnesses domestic violence includes, but is not limited to, the child being subjected to a violent interaction between their parents, whereby threats of harm are made toward a family member while that person is holding the child, when the child's in the room, or when the child is within hearing distance of the altercation. Additionally, a child may be witness to violence when they are held hostage by the abusing parent. In such cases, the child may be held against their will and/or against the abused parent's will, which is meant to force the parent who is being abused to return back to the family home. Other instances where a child may witness domestic violence is in the aftermath of an altercation. The child may be left unable to care for the abused parent who is subsequently injured in the abusive altercation, and that parent requires help. Children are also left confused after witnessing the abuser's behavior toward the offended parent, changing drastically from violent to loving and back to violent again, as the cycle of abuse declines. A child is also traumatized when law enforcement or other agencies intervene to help the family by removing the abusing family member from the home. And traumatization can also occur when the child is subject to moving into a domestic violence shelter with their abused parent, thus being removed from what they know is familiar to that which is unknown. Indications and prevalence. On slide 4. The indications and prevalence of children witnessing domestic violence, as Edelson explains, to the degree that it is observed today, has been considered a recent phenomenon. Yet the increased knowledge of such incidences are a reflection of public's growing awareness over the last 30 to 40 years, as cited by the Missouri Coalition Against Domestic and Sexual Violence. Therefore, this is not a new phenomenon, and as a result of these efforts, it was reported that 10% of children have witnessed intrafamily assault. What this means is that an estimated 15.5 million children are being exposed to domestic violence. Furthermore, it cited that just under half of those children, 7 million, are exposed to severe and chronic violence between intimate partners. This evidences the fact that domestic violence is a wide-reaching problem for children who witness such incidents. So how does domestic violence and its effects impact the children who are witness to such traumatizing conditions? One source suggests that children suffer differently from domestic violence as a witness than as a direct victim of maltreatment or abuse. The emotional and psychological impacts are also wide-reaching. Slide 5. The effects of witnessing domestically violent conditions are vast. To list them all would be difficult and a time-consuming effort. However, some of the most notable effects are recognized in the child's inhibited ability or reticence in regard to trusting others. Additionally, child witnesses tend to have an under or undeveloped sense of personal control and an under or undeveloped sense of safety and security in the world around them. These children also tend to demonstrate a decrease in their social competencies, a reduction in interpersonal sensitivities and empathy, and a decline in levels of appropriate interpersonal or relational problem-solving skills. Slide 6. Furthermore, there's a greater incidence for a child witness to develop post-traumatic stress disorder or PTSD. In fact, Victor Carrion and Heilig Kletter suggest that acute trauma can lead to secondary stressors, initiating a chronic process of adjustment. In other words, these children who have witnessed intrafamily violence tend to engage in a continuous state of adjustment to varying and traumatizing conditions, whether they are actual or perceived. The effects of as much can be noticed in exaggerated developmental problems and physiological responses, which are displayed through a heightened perception of danger. This heightened perception of danger in child witnesses is often displayed through the child's demonstration of hypervigilance, exaggerated startle responses, and increased anxieties. Additionally, such effects of PTSD can be recognized in a child's poor regulation of affect, depression, and worsening externalized behavioral problems. Child witnesses who are experiencing the effects of PTSD while act out also may reflect decreased academic functioning and/or the hindered development of social skills. So in slide 7, while it's often presumed that children are in fact resilient, these identified effects present a different image of what witnessing domestic violence does to a child. It can be inferred that children are not necessarily resilient, rather they are unable or they may be unsure of how they can express themselves after witnessing domestically violent circumstances. They may not know who they can trust to talk to about their concerns over what happened or about what the effects are that they are experiencing in themselves. Therefore, they struggle to convey their reactions appropriately in relation to witnessing the abusiveness in their families. They need help and they need intervention to overcome the adverse effects of domestic violence. The presumption that a child witness needs intervention leads to solutions. Child witnesses are in fact notably willing to discuss the negative impacts of exposure to violence and trauma on their daily lives, as discovered in a study by Carissa Shavers. Inasmuch, it is also recognized that implementing trauma-informed care can reduce PTSD symptoms in complexly traumatized youth who are victimized witnesses of domestic violence. With this knowledge and information about the effects of domestic violence on child witnesses, one now has a greater understanding of the importance of providing treatment, care, and solutions to the innocent, forgotten, and silent victims of abused homes, which will be discussed later in another presentation. In the meantime, I want to encourage you to research further the effects of domestic violence on child witnesses and the characteristics of PTSD in these circumstances and how trauma-informed care helps make the difference in these injured lives.